Igor, Kostya, and Vika, a trio of good friends, united by volunteer work to rescue stray animals, combed the outskirts of their small town. Young and full of vitality, they believed in themselves and in the business they were passionate about. Yegor smoked leisurely and looked around. "Hey, Kostyan, there don't seem to be any tracks. You said you saw a whole pack. Is that for sure?" Kostya stopped. That's right, I'm telling you. The landfill was burned out, and they all moved into the taiga. Well, maybe not straight from the fief, but I definitely saw 5-6 little dogs there. And you won't believe it, there was even one Rottweiler. Vika, walking along the path, was the last can to say, well, if they left the landfill, they could only go into the forest. That's where we need to go. I hope it's not dangerous. The young people left the industrial area of their town and walked along a narrow river separating a residential area and a taiga forest, beyond which wild forests began for many kilometers. Yegor stubbed out his cigarette butt and stomped it into the dirty moss. "Let's go to the bridge and cross the river, then look back a bit." Kostya nodded. "Yes, I think there is nothing dangerous, especially when there is still an opportunity to take a walk in the forest. I put a thermos in my backpack and chewed on something. We can make a camp. And by the way, a Rottweiler. Can you imagine if it belongs to someone?" Vika followed. That's right. There was a wooden bridge that creaked under their feet. The bridge seemed to symbolize the transition from civilized places to uninhabited places of the Taiga Falls. This is how many towns in Siberia are organized. It would seem that the city houses heating and electricity, and I went a little beyond the outskirts and it was all taiga. The air was filled with the smell of pine needles and decayed foliage. And soon, the young people found a small clearing, illuminated by the rays of the setting sun breaking through the crowns. Kostya took off his backpack first and sat down on a fallen tree. "It's getting late. Let's have a snack here," he said, taking out a thermos and a bag of sandwiches. Meanwhile, Igor gathered an armful of dry branches and lit a small fire, carefully surrounding it with stones. "This is so that all the local animals don't come running at us," he joked, glancing at the forest. Vika looked around, picking up a plastic water bottle. "Well, is it just so that you don't accidentally call the bear?" She replied with a grin, although her voice sounded a little strained. "Come on, bears. The bears are much further north," Kostya said confidently, pouring hot tea into plastic mugs. "And here are the dogs. Imagine if a Rottweiler finds us, and I wonder if he's even kind or if he'll take all our sandwiches." Everyone laughed, but it sounded muffled in the forest, as if the trees were swallowing it up. While the guys were eating and chatting, the forest around them was slowly darkening. The sky on the horizon was getting closer, and something flashed by. Igor downloaded it and turned around, squinting. Maybe it's just forests? But there was a rustle in the bushes again, and it became clear that these were not forests. The dark figure approached, as if a shadow had detached itself from an amorphous forest monolith. But soon, it became visible. It was a dog, big and powerful, with dark fur and eyes that glowed brightly in the firelight. "It's a Rottweiler," Kostya muttered. "Quiet," whispered Vika, clutching a sandwich in her hand. The dog slowly came closer, stopped at the edge of the firelight and growled. The Rottweiler looked exhausted and skinny. His ribs were visible under his fur, but his gaze was hard and angry. "Hello, doggy. Hello," said Igor cautiously, raising his hands to show that he was harmless. Rottweiler grinned in response. His large teeth and slobbery mouth gleamed in the firelight. "He's scared," said Vika softly. Her voice was trembling. Kostya slowly reached into his backpack took out the remains of the sausage, and held them out towards the dog. "Come on, buddy. We're not enemies. We won't hurt you." But it seemed like something was holding him back from coming closer. Meanwhile, there was a rustle in the forest again, as if someone else was making their way through the bushes. Igor looked in that direction, clutching a knife in his pocket. "He's not alone," the guy whispered faintly. "There's someone else there." The rustling grew louder, and silhouettes began to emerge from the forest one by one. And 5 more dogs, as thin and hungry as a Rottweiler. The angry dogs surrounded the trio, forming a semicircle. "Boys, what should we do?" Vika whispered, swallowing. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the sinister figures of the dogs, whose hungry gaze left no doubt, and they had not just come to watch. Kostya pulled a burning brand out of the fire and held it out in front of him. The dogs stiffened and growled harder. Everything seemed to be hanging by a thread. Igor put himself in front of Vika. We walked slowly away, not turning around, not looking in the eyes, just walking away. But Vika was trembling all over, and it was she who could not stand the strain and ran down the path, screaming loudly. Kostya threw a firebrand at the dogs, but it didn't scare them at all. Igor was already running after Vika. Kostya turned around and shouted, "Hey, wait, wait!" But Vika and Igor didn't stop. Kostya desperately rushed to the nearest pine tree. His hands were shaking as he clung to the bark, trying to pull himself up higher. He barely had time to swing one leg over the lower branch before the dogs grabbed onto his jacket and yanked him down. The dogs worked together like a real pack of predators. One of the dogs jumped on his back, the other grabbed his trouser leg. Kostya screamed, trying to fight back, but the teeth and claws were already dragging him out of the tree. The branch under his foot snapped and broke off, and the guy fell to the ground with a thud. The dogs immediately rushed at him. The Rottweiler was the first. His jaws locked onto Bones's forearm. A powerful jerk tore a piercing scream out of the guy's mouth. "Get off me! Get off me! Get off me! Igor, Vika, help me!" The dogs, maddened by the proximity of prey and blood, surrounded the bone, growling and baring their teeth. They grabbed their hands by their legs and tore their clothes, exposing their skin, which immediately turned purple. Kostya kicked, trying to cover himself with his hands, but the pressure was too great. His body arched in agony, and his screams turned to wheezing. One of the dogs grabbed him by the throat. The crunching of the neck was loud and terrifying. Kostya twitched convulsively several times, and then everything stopped. But the pack did not stop there. They continued to torment Bones's body and tear flesh, scattering shreds of clothing and pieces of meat. The animals' faces became more and more scarlet, and the dull rumbling mixed with the wet sound of tearing fabrics. Giaour and Vika heard this nightmare behind them. Dogs barking, whispering, and bones crunching. Everything merged into a terrible chorus of death. Vika, who was running ahead, was choking with sobs, but she did not dare to look back. Igor, with a gloomy face, clutched the knife in his hand, knowing that their comrade was dead, and they would be next if they slowed down even for a moment. Finally, they reached the swamp and stopped. Vika was shaking. No, it can't be. Dogs? They're not supposed to be mean. Kostya, for God's sake, what did they do to Kostya? Igor paid no attention to her. One thought crept into his head. Tears rolled down from his eyes. She whispered nervously, "No, go back. We need to go back." Igor grimaced and slapped her across the face. "No, you fool. You have to go through the swamp. Look, that's where the mosses are lighter. It's dry there." Vika sobbed, looking at Igor's tense face, and seemed to come to her senses for a moment. Igor pushed her forward, guiding her steps. "You're the first," he said hoarsely. "Go as I say, and I'll cover it. I can get you out, if anything." The girl stumbled away. Her feet sank into the mud, but she kept moving. Igor followed her, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. The swamp seemed to have a life of its own. The hummocks bent under his feet, slurping, and a thick fog spread in the air, which hid the forest behind. Fortunately, the dogs did not appear, but the smell of the dog, sour and heavy, was still in the air. When the guys finally got out of the swamp, dry land appeared ahead. Vika could barely stand on her feet, but she clung to the bushes with her last strength. "Igor, look," she whispered, pointing ahead. There was a hut on a small hillock among the trees. It was small, but with a sagging roof. It looked like something out of place in the middle of a forest thicket. The walls were covered with moss, and the only window gaped with inner darkness. "A hunting trip, or something like that," Igor muttered, hardly believing his eyes. He came closer, cautiously looking around the building. The door hung on the top hinge alone, but it looked surprisingly sturdy. "It can be safe there," Igor said, looking back at Vika. "Hurry up, let's go in." The inside of the hut was dark and stuffy. The air smelled of dampness, mustiness, and something else, subtly unpleasant, either dust or wet earth. The surroundings screamed of desolation. In the corner was a rough-hewn cot with a striped mattress covered with torn and moldy blankets, a broken plastic reel with the remains of a fishing line. An empty tin can of stew and a pair of old cracked shoes were lying on the floor. On a table made of rough planks, there was a kerosene lamp covered with a thick layer of dust. There were hunting cartridges blackened by time and a pile of crumpled papers that looked like old notes or lists. In the corner by the stove lay an armful of rotten wood, but the stove looked as if it hadn't been heated in years. "Who lived here?" the hunter muttered, looking around. She sat down on a rickety chair that creaked as if protesting against such a load. "Maybe a hunter, or maybe some kind of hermit, but it's been a long time," Igor said. He ran his hand along the wall, wiping away the cobwebs with his palm. Then he took out his phone and looked at the screen. There was no signal, just a gray communication indicator, coldly proclaiming complete loneliness. Igor ran an irritated hand through his hair. "Holy shit!" He put the phone in his pocket and sat down heavily on the edge of the cot. "So what do we do now?" Vika looked up at him with reddened eyes. "Maybe we can try to come back in the morning. I just need to take a break." Igor frowned, looking at the floor. "In the morning? We still have to live until morning. Who said that we will be saved beyond the swamp? What should we do now?" She was ready to cry again. Igor looked up, staring thoughtfully at the door. "We need to catch our breath, look around, and then come back. But not by that route. You can't cross the swamp. It's too dangerous. Let's try to get around it, and then we'll go out to the bridge." Igor got up, went to the door, and, opening it a crack, looked out. As the night deepened, the fog grew thicker. As if filling every corner of the forest, nothing could be seen. "Get some rest for now," the guy called over his shoulder, "and I'll sit at the entrance and listen to what's outside." Exhausted, Vika just nodded and wrapped herself in her jacket. Igor sat on the German near the door, putting the knife on his knee. Various thoughts raced through his head that made him want to howl, but he forced himself to focus on the sounds of the forest. Vika was tossing and turning on a hard tread, wrapped in a jacket. She tossed the mattress onto the floor in disgust. Sleep did not bring peace. She could still see the maddened eyes of the dogs in front of her and hear Bones screaming. But then, through the veil of disturbing visions, some voices began to break through, abruptly in fragments, and then in separate words. But the girl still couldn't wake up. A gaur was actually talking to someone. His voice was muffled, but it kept shaking, as if he was trying to keep his voice low but couldn't hide the tension. "I'm telling you, we were chased by dogs, we almost died, and this hut is the only place we could reach?" The answer was rude, low, and laced with malice. "This is my property. I don't care what happens to you, you're not staying. Here, get out!" Vika struggled to open her eyes, but the eyelids were too heavy. Stress and fatigue, like a thick blanket, pressed her to the floor. Her consciousness floated somewhere between sleep and reality. "Listen." Igor's voice became quieter, as if he was trying to explain something or negotiate. "We can't leave at night. The dogs will find us. Let's leave in the morning, just give us a little break, please." "No," I said, "get out." There was a rough whisper, and then a quiet but threatening sound. The metal blade slipped out of its sheath. Vika wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Her body seemed to be paralyzed. The only thing she could do was turn her head slightly. Through her half-closed eyes, she saw Igor's shadow approach her. He whispered, but he didn't have time to finish. It all happened suddenly and too fast. A flash, then a flash, a movement. The figure behind Agar darted forward with lightning speed, and the blade entered the guy's neck. Blood gushed from the wound in a powerful fountain, drenching Vika in thick drops. Her eyes widened and her heart started pounding. Igor pushed himself back, clutching his throat. His eyes widened in pain and shock. He took a step as if he wanted to say something, but only wheezed, choking on his own blood. A moment later, his legs gave way, and he collapsed to the floor. Vika barely had time to realize what was happening when the figure of a man, whose face loomed in the dim light, stepped towards her. He was a man of about 40, with a rude, neglected appearance. His face was hidden by thick stubble. His eyes glittered with cold fury, and a slobbery mouth bubbled on his lower lip. He was growling. Vika tried to crawl away, but her arms and legs felt like cotton wool. The man knelt down, grabbed her by the shoulders, and yanked her to the floor. "Don't move!" He barked and fell on top of her. Vika screamed, writhing with all her might, but the stranger hit her face on the floor, grabbing her by the hair. Everything shook, and my head was filled with ringing. Vika fell silent. Tears blurred her eyes, and the taste of blood appeared in her mouth. The man pressed the girl's head to the floor with one hand, and with the other began to pull off a leather belt from his belt. "Shut up!" he said angrily. "The sooner I do everything, the less it will hurt you." He pressed his knee into her shoulder blades, put his hands behind her back, and began to tie them with a belt. "You're not the first one who's decided to come here. The smart ones left right away. But you and your boyfriend turned out to be stupid." Tears were streaming down Vika's face, mixing with blood and dirt, but she was still weakly trying to pull away, clinging to a grain of hope. Meanwhile, the man seemed to enjoy her helplessness. Vika had been lying on the floor, breathing heavily for several minutes. Her hands burned from the tightness of the belt, and her face throbbed from the blow. Her head was still ringing, but through the silence of the hut, she heard sounds that made her heart sink. Heavy dragging. The man dragged Igor's body outside, and then there was a joyful dog barking, loud and enthusiastic, as if someone had called the dogs to a feast. Vika froze. Her breathing became rapid and ragged. Her imagination pictured a Rottweiler with burning eyes chasing them through the woods. The barking was joined by other sounds, growls, sobs, and excited whining. And somewhere nearby, a man's voice was heard, rough, and at the same time, calm. "Wait, wait, dear ones. There's enough meat for everyone." Vika wanted to cover her ears, but her bound hands wouldn't let her. She bit her lip to keep from screaming when she heard a wet, crunching sound. Axe. The heavy blade bit into something soft. The girl twisted her neck, straining with all her strength to turn around. Through a small gap between the wall and the closed front door, she saw a pack of dogs clinging to something. They had scraps of cloth, meat, and Agor's head in their teeth. The head rolled on the ground like a toy, and the dogs grabbed it, pushed it with their paws, and played as if with a sword. Vika's body trembled, and instead of a scream, a pitiful, doomed moan escaped from her throat. At that moment, a man appeared in the doorway. His face was still twisted into a satisfied grin, as if he was watching the most exciting performance of his life. "Well, baby," he said with icy confidence, tilting his head. "I'll take care of you myself, but a little later. Be patient for a bit." His eyes flashed in the semi-darkness, and he closed the door, leaving Vika alone with the horror and doom of a bound victim.